Just one sec, I'll just do an intro to the motion. Okay, hello everyone and welcome to the third round of New Zealand secondary schools debating. On the motion today is this House would abolish national secondary school education standards, for example NCEA, in favour of secondary schools establishing their own curriculums and accreditations. On the AFF side we have BOP, and on the NEG side we have Wellington Gold. I wish both teams all the best of luck for what I hope will be a really high quality debate today, and invite up the first speaker of side proposition to open their team's case.
We all good? We are facing a crisis. We have children who can barely read, and their education is being decided not by trained teachers, but by white bureaucrats in Wellington who've never taught children a day in their lives. NCEA and other nationalized standards are failing our children. We need this to change. So what do we support on our side of the house? How do we get a pragmatic solution? We're getting rid of NCEA, we're getting rid of GCSEs, we're getting rid of Cambridge and secondary schools, we're abolishing these nationalized standards. Instead, curriculum would be made by the faculty of that particular school. So the English teachers would make the English curriculum, math teachers would make the math curriculum. No, this would be peer reviewed among staff. So faculty would review their own curriculums to ensure the curriculums work together and this accreditation works together so they have a balanced education. It's going to be regulated by the ministry to ensure it's like up to certain standards. We don't want teachers to just go, oh, we're not going to teach you anything. That's just our curriculum, right? So it's still going to be regulated by the ministry. And note, there would be a transitionary period where we abolish these nationalized standards and they're able to form their own curriculum. To burden today's debate, we either need to prove that we get increased equality of education or that we benefit student well-being or education. 3 points today. Firstly, how this policy benefits students. Secondly, how we revitalize low decile schools. Thirdly, how this policy benefits teachers. Luca will cover that. Firstly, on how this policy benefits students. So what the national secondary standards like NCEA look like. Firstly, it looks like highly structured and it's inflexible. Every student is assessed the same. Secondly, it's extremely competitive, right? They're marked to a bell curve. Assessments aren't marked to quality of work. They're marked like relative to other students to establish their grade. Thirdly, it's made by ministry bureaucrats, right? I've already covered this, but most of them aren't even teachers and they don't see the day-to-day harms of the system.
On that.
So how does a self-run curriculum benefit students? Firstly, it's made by the teachers, right? Teachers care about the curriculum. Oftentimes, people don't go into teaching if they don't care about like students and for the money. So they know how to teach. They know how to tailor the curriculum for a few reasons. So how will the curriculum be tailored? Firstly, it's like general scale. It's going to be tailored to the school, the facilities available to the school, and the knowledge that teachers have. Secondly, it's going to be tailored to the students, right? Their gender, whether it's a single-sex school, men learn differently to women, like generally speaking. Women learn differently to men. If you have a single-sex school, teachers are able to like corroborate that and make the curriculum like adaptable. Thirdly, religion. A lot of schools are religious. They can incorporate that into their curriculum. Fourthly, culture schools. When you have te reo immersion schools that have to teach up to an NCEA standard, we find that pretty like disgusting. Like, why not incorporate that te reo into the standard and work it into the curriculum? We think that's really beneficial. Secondly, the achievement is based on the quality of work rather than relative quality, right? There's no nationalism of curriculum. Students have like a sense of responsibility when they're not pitted against each other. Their work isn't being compared to other students. It's being compared to the curriculum that teachers have made for them. Thirdly, the content is far more interesting. Teachers can establish like an awesome curriculum. They're literally teachers. Like, let them do their job. They can build content that students will enjoy, and they're not teaching to a test. Fourthly, we're able to make an integrated curriculum of subjects. This is so crucial. With NCEA's standardized nature, learning is segregated by subject. The workforce in real life is all about integrating subjects together, like forming connections between science and social sciences and English. It looks like socio-scientific issues like vaccines and GMO crops. It looks like practical applications of maths and statistics. and like utilizing humanities subjects to contextualize data. This is much easier when schools make their curriculum, as they can work together as faculty without having to like adhere to these strict requirements by a nationalized system. So what does this actually mean for students? Firstly, it's incredibly motivating for these kids, because they're able to learn better. Their learning is tailored towards them. It's far more interesting. They have opportunities to succeed, and they're not constantly competing against their peers. The comparative is, like, students are so unhappy under the status quo. That's what side opposition has to defend. Like, massive rates of, like, literacy rates being incredibly low. Students, like, committing suicide at massive rates. That's what they have to defend, because NCEA is failing us. We're providing you the pragmatic solution. Secondly, it's far better for the mental health of these students, right? Because they have decreased focus on there's a decreased focus on assessments, and like a more focus on content and how you're actually learning. And like all the internals aren't on the same week. It's less stressful for these students. They're able to like change the curriculum to make it work for them. Students are going to come to school. This is so important. We have record low attendance rates. The rate, like all that matters in this, right, debate, right, is the students and who gets the most benefits for them. They're going to come to school because I've told you it's so interesting. It's so beneficial for these students. The worst case scenario is the students are going to come to school simply because like school isn't unbearable anymore. Like maybe they're not even paying attention, but they're still exposed to that learning. But what we think is more likely to happen is students are going to be like far happier under our side of the house because of this change in curriculum. They're going to be extremely happy. They're going to be coming to school. They're going to be learning. Yes, I'll take your POI.
Does the speaker think without as much standardization, universities will value systems?
No, absolutely. Okay, so when different schools have different curriculum systems, right? They're going to compete against each other to see who has the best curriculum system, right? Because it's going to be like extremely beneficial for these teachers as well. And I think like the curriculum will be far greatly improved. I mean, you have to concede that NCEA is like a terrible system and it's failing us. We're giving you a solution. I don't understand how you claim any of these benefits on your side. So secondly, on low decile schools, so what do these low decile schools actually look like? They look like poor students going to poor schools. Secondly, they look like teachers struggling to teach these students. Thirdly, they look like they're stuck in a cycle of not learning and not coming to school. So how does this change after low decile schools get like a change in curriculum? Firstly, like benefits to these minority groups that go to these schools, right? They don't feel represented in the current curriculum. I mean, it's a curriculum made of like colonial roots. Like let's look at Stowe in Australia, a book about like massacring Aboriginals, and then like about how it's about a white man and how bad he feels for it, right? This isn't like, they don't feel represented in schools. When we change the curriculum, we represent these students, we make them far happier and far more interested in what they're going to learn. Secondly, more teachers move to these schools. Teachers care about their reputation, they care about having an impact. When we're able to give them like chances to be incredibly impactful to these students, they're going to want to move because they want to like make like awesome curriculums, right? Because it's going to like increase their reputation. It's going to be able to like climb up and get these like managerial positions in school if they can be incredibly beneficial in crafting a good curriculum. Thirdly, there's like a transitional focus because some students don't want to go to uni. We can have integrated learning to transition to apprenticeships to work for all schools. Fourthly, the realistic standards. The curriculum is broad under NCEA. It's cookie cut. They make assumptions about levels that students are when they come to these schools, and oftentimes these low decile schools aren't at those levels, right? So when we can lower the bar a little bit, we think it's far more achievable, tangible goals for these schools on our side, because we can set real attainable standards. Even if the students don't reach the level to like other students in the country, they still reach a higher standard under the status quo. So what are the outcomes of this? Like, please note, this is the most like vulnerable students, judges, right? Because the fact is, NCEA is going to work for the upper class. It's going to work for these richer private schools. What it's not working for, these low socioeconomic schools where these children are struggling. That's what we're changing on our side of the house. That's the benefits they cannot claim. We get a massive improvement in education. They feel represented. They want to come to school. They're interested. Teachers are teaching them what they want to teach. They're being taught what they want to learn. And secondly, when we make it far less competitive, we remove so much social stress, like I've already told you. NCEA is failing these students the most. That's why it's so important to change the curriculum, like I've described. Any benefit to their education means we win the debate. So proud to propose.
I thank the speaker for a fine speech and now invite the first member of Side Negating to come up and open their team's case today.
what the affirming team fails to recognize already about schools having extremely catered systems towards what they think their student body looks like is the incredible amount of harms that this will bring up that NCEA, that are unique to their side of the house, that NCEA does not propose. Three things for you today. Firstly, what are the government's incentives when they create a schooling system? Secondly, what are the school's incentives and how does that benefit a student's educational outcomes? And thirdly, how does the English department make this curriculum? What are they basing it off of? And stuff like that. But I'll start with a little bit of rebuttal. So, we heard immediately from the affirming team that these schools will have highly catered systems to their student body so that their student body can have the best education they need. But actually what we think having a highly catered system entails means schools making an assumption about their student body, thinking about what does the average student at this college or this high school want, and basing their entire curriculum off of that, and then you get this large portion of students who are just disenfranchised by this, as opposed to NCEA, which has so many different options for everyone and pathways. They tried to say that NCEA is so highly structured that everyone has to learn the same way and that everyone has to learn the same stuff and that it's not good. But actually we see that because NCEA has been around for so long and been developing, because the government wants good educational outcomes for students, NCEA actually has several pathways for students to learn in a way that's best for them. And also the insane array of subjects that is only possible through government funding allows for students to take what they want to take and learn what they want to learn. We think that what will happen with schools, actually, is that because they don't have much money, especially at a low decile school, they're going to have to pick a few subjects that they need to teach everyone, and then everyone has to learn those subjects, and then that is a worse educational outcome. We then heard from side AFF that a curriculum should be made by teachers and not by some white bureaucrat. We actually think that because the government wants good educational outcomes for students, because they want good employees in the future and good university students, they're actually going to employ teachers at NZQA at NCEA so that they get the best curriculum. We actually completely disagree with this notion that it's just white bureaucrats sitting in the MOE office. And we think that teachers are employed there. We think that the curriculum is actually made for students. And that actually perfectly brings me on to my first point. But you know what? Before that, I'll take one.
If you think these teachers are incorporated into the NZQA process, why are they striking so much?
The teachers are striking so much because they're not paid enough. And we actually think that with the millions and millions of dollars that this upheaval of the school system will take, we could actually just pay these teachers more with that money and actually get them to stop striking so much, because they have such bad working conditions at the moment because schools are putting so much pressure on them to do all this work. And if we put a bunch more work on their backs by saying that we should have integrated te reo when we have such a scarcity of te reo teachers because they've got so much work on their plate, we actually think that that's way worse outcomes for teachers. But that's my third point, so thank you. Okay, first of all, government standardized systems. So the government seeks to set students up for their future. The government seeks to have students that are prepared enough for university or prepared enough for trades or prepared enough for whatever they want to do, so that then they can be good employees and make money for the system and, be good for, let's say we're in New Zealand or let's say we're in America, right? That is the government's incentive. When the government has a standardized system for education, they are curating it to all of New Zealand so that all of New Zealand gets the best outcome that they want, right? You scroll down the NZQA page, there are about 100 subjects you can take. And that only happens when the government has a separate body so that they have enough funding and enough resources and enough experts to provide those subjects to each student, rather than a school having to cater their curriculum to what they assume a student wants. We think that uniquely about standardization, all students have an equal opportunity for education, right? That means that a student at Taita College is going to get the same educational opportunities regardless of what we actually think goes into the suicide rates and the low pass rates, which is home lives and pressure and stuff like that. We actually think that it's really, really important that a student at Taita College has the same subject opportunities and moderation of their classes that a student at Scots College does, right? So we think that standardization uniquely gives students accessibility. We think it uniquely gives them an equal playing field, as much as the government can control it. Because we think that equal playing fields don't come from highly catered education systems to the assumption of a student in a single school. We think that actually low pass rates and high mental health issue rates are because of outside factors that actually we think are caused by a lack of counselors in schools, or a lack of opportunities for tutoring, right? And we think that the massive amount of money that this will take can be put into the actual problems and the actual things that we need. We think that also uniquely about standardized systems, moderation by a separate body like NZQA is possible and very simple, which let's take New Zealand, it's compulsory here. Every internal that every school marks, that every teacher marks, every teacher with their own biases and their own beliefs is moderated by a separate body so that bias is out of the picture. You take a racist history teacher, it takes one click of a button on in this highly catered education system for them to mark a Māori student lower than a white student. Whereas under NZQA, you have moderation for every single random internals from every single school, so that is taken out of the picture. We do not think that teachers or HODs' biases should be taken into account in any system when students' futures are on the line. So, speaking of students' futures, my second point, schools, highly catered systems. So, what we think will actually happen when schools are taking into account how to make these systems, regardless of the fact that this will probably take 80-hour work weeks for these English HODs that you guys are talking about, and regardless of how much money this will take schools, so Scots College can do it better than Taita, right? Which I'll get onto. Regardless of that, schools' incentives are actually for their students to show up. As you've said, we have a high truancy rate. Schools' incentives are for the students to pass and to reach their fullest potential. So this looks like for high achieving students, get scholarships and look good to universities. But for low achieving students, and we see disproportionately at some schools there is a large number of high achieving, and at some schools there is a low achieving. So that plays into this whole bias thing of universities seeing. That's later. Anyway, for low achieving students, it looks like schools wanting them to pass. It looks like them wanting to have the certificate at the end of year 13. It looks like them wanting students to show up, meaning schools are going to cater their curriculums to the average student. A school where they used to have a low UE rate is going to now make their curriculum easier, meaning there's a whole lot of students that are disenfranchised because now they have to work with an easier curriculum. And no matter how well they do with that curriculum, a university is going to look at their record and be like, oh, these standards were extremely easy. We're not going to give you that scholarship now. We're not going to let you into this university now, etc., etc. It is a spiral of bias because once a student graduates college, this is the time when they are going out into the world, and a university needs to know what they're good at. And if a school has a catered curriculum to the average student who probably was less high achieving than this one, this student is now completely disenfranchised and cannot get the opportunities that they would have under a standardized government run education system. Schools make curriculums based on assumptions and what will be easiest because teachers are striking so much. They don't want to have to do all this work to make a whole new curriculum. We think that the reason standardized systems are so good is because they're optimal for students' futures, they're preparatory, they're accessible, and they are able to be moderated. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for a great speech, and I now invite the second speaker of Side Proposition to come up and continue their team's case today.
Mine? On your chair. Yeah. This is every time. I need to remember. This is for the cameras, guys. There's so many people in the audience. They need to see me looking at my best. Yeah. Who do we care about the most in this debate? We care about low-income students, about Māori and Pacifica students in schools who at the moment are completely ostracized, completely removed, completely not catered for in our education system. These are the students where we have low literacy rates for. These are the students who are dropping out early. These are the students who are contributing to our low attendance rates. These are the students we need to be catering our education system for. NCEA, standardized systems, does not do this. 3 points in this speech. First of all, why the quality of our education system is better. Second of all, why the student experience is better. Thirdly, a split point on how teachers are benefited by this policy. So, why the quality of our education system is better. What do we hear from negating? They say that schools are going to be making assumptions about their student body in order to make these curriculums, right? Well, let's just point out here that NCEA is going to be making a whole lot more assumptions about the student body than schools can, right? Like schools get data, schools are in their schools, right? Like the teachers meet with their students, the teachers teach people in those areas, the teachers live in those areas, right? They get that the full raw data of their own student body, right? They know much more about their individual schools than NCEA ever would. NCEA is forced in a position where they have to make assumptions because they're having to create a curriculum that's going to work for the whole country. Obviously, there's different learning needs in different parts of the country, but NCEA can't cater to that because they need to make a system that's blanket, cookie cutter, fits for all. This doesn't work, right? We think these schools are going to know a lot more about these students. These schools are going to be so much more capable to create a curriculum that fits with their students. This looks like maybe in certain areas, they can tailor the learning to things that the students are experiencing in their lives. Maybe if it's a more rural area, they can tailor that learning to more rural things that these students are experiencing rather than things that students will be experiencing in cities, right? If students can go into class and can feel what they're learning is actually relevant to them and what they're learning is actually something that they can apply in their real life, they're so much more likely to want to come to school because they feel it's worth their time because they can apply that knowledge into their own lives. If students are going to school in these low decile places with a standardized curriculum from NCEA, they're being taught the same thing the students in rich areas are being taught. This is not relevant to these students. That's why they're not coming to school. That's why the literacy rates are so low, right? The second thing we hear from AFF on this point is that we have teachers as advisors right now in NZQA and they're making the system so good, right? But first of all, they're only advisors. They don't have the real power. The real power is from these ministry government officials who never they don't work in, sure, maybe they have some experience of working in school, but they're not in the day-to-day life of the school. They're not trained in education. Sure, the teachers have advisors, but the teachers don't have the power. The government also has all these other different incentives as well floating around. They have to allocate their time. They have to allocate their resources to all the other things in the country. School education can't be their top priority because they have so many other priorities as a government, right? What do they also say here? They say schools can't offer the same quality of education because they can't offer this amazing massive list of subjects, right? First of all, we don't hear why it's good that students have a massive list of subjects to choose from. This actually, firstly, it creates a lot of confusion for them. Secondly, there's no way that all of those subjects are going to be relevant. Surely a lot of those subjects aren't actually going to get them into good careers. There's only some subjects that workplaces that universities actually care about. And so by just giving this standardized list of here's 2,000 subjects you can take, it's that's not actually helpful for students. They don't know, they need to be offered the subjects that they're actually going to want to do. But even if it is good that we have all these subjects, what negating seems to think is that these schools are no longer getting funded because, I don't know, they don't have as much money. Let's point out that we're not removing government funding from schools. We're just removing the national education curriculum. They're still getting funded. They're still getting just as much money as they were getting before. We don't see how this changes, right? But also, schools don't, just because NCEA has this massive list of subjects doesn't mean that schools already offer all of those subjects, right? Especially in low decile areas, a lot of the time schools can't offer all the subjects because they just don't have the teachers to offer all the subjects. They don't have the resources to offer all the subjects. So we don't think we're removing anything from these schools on our side. I'll take a POI.
Do you think that schools have the means for a wide enough range of subjects to cater to a whole student body of 2,000 students the same way that the government has the means to do that?
Well, just like I already said, there are already schools that don't have, we are already in the status quo. Not all schools have those 2,000 subjects in their own curriculums, right? Schools can only have a certain amount of subjects anyway. This doesn't matter regardless of whether their curriculum is made by NCEA, whether their curriculum is made by the staff. We think that if it's the staff, then the staff can prioritize, building the curriculum towards the subject that school is actually going to realistically be able to offer. Now, second point of clash on why students improve. They say here that these accreditations, these university records are so important and they need this NCEA qualifications to be able to get into school. What do we say on this point, right? Firstly, what's more important for students? Some shiny badge that just says you passed NCEA level 2, that doesn't tell anything to the employers about like what the students like, anything to do with them. What's more important is that we motivate these students to be engaged in their learning, to want to come to school, because that motivation is what gets them into pathways after school, right? It's not just universities that we're talking about here. Like, the large problem isn't about like these top students who are going to be going to the universities. The large problem in our country is about like the lower skilled students who probably wouldn't necessarily be going to university anyway. Those are the students we should be caring about. That NCEA like thing for them doesn't necessarily do much. What do we need to do for them? Motivate them to come to school, get them engaged in their learning, because that engagement is what's going to be most likely to get them to like seek out other, like maybe they'll start doing more extracurriculars, you know, because they're coming to school. They have all these other opportunities as well. That's what will get them work placement, that experience, that like love for learning, that like motivation to want to learn, right? Like, so we think that like the most important issue in the debate are these low-income students, these like Māori and Pacifica students who, right now, that's the big problem in our country. Because for New Zealand to like progress on a global scale, like we think that these like high students, you know, they're gonna succeed under whatever system they're put under, right? Because they already have that motivation, like that internal motivation, that intrinsic motivation is what matters most. We think that these low-income students don't have that intrinsic motivation. That's why they're not coming to school. That's what we need to foster in these students. Now, onto my split point about how teachers are benefited by this policy. So, context here is that teachers are currently failed by the system, right? Because they're forced to teach to the test. Secondly, they have this pressure of getting these students to pass the national curriculum. Thirdly, because they can't individualize their teaching to students. Fourthly, because the system is constantly changing. Like, they have to keep relearning everything to know what they have to teach because the system is changing all the time, right? We see unhappiness about this in large numbers. Like, they're not happy with the curriculum. Like, ask any teacher. None of them are going to say, yeah, I love NCEA, right? So how is the system better for teachers? Because firstly, they make it. They can tailor it to what they're like realistically able to teach, right? A curriculum is only as good as the teachers who teach it. So if we have this curriculum made by NCEA, regardless of whether it's a good curriculum or not, it doesn't matter unless these teachers are able to teach it successfully, right? And like, note that ministry regulations that we said at first are going to make sure that this isn't low quality. This will get rid of all of like the stuff you said about like racist teachers and stuff like that who are like blatantly like, we're still gonna have regulations and ways that we can get that out of there. We think NCQA is racist in itself. Like, where is all the New Zealand history and the history curriculum? It's all about Britain. Like, you know, these schools, this is where we can build that in here, right? Also, teachers, if there's less assessment focus, they have less paperwork, less marking. That's what's going to ease the pressure on them, right? Like, they work long hours outside of school. If they have to have less focus on like getting their students to succeed and more focus on like getting their students to love and enjoy the learning that they're doing, that's so much better for them because that's what they want to do, right? They don't go into teaching to get the numbers of like, I got 30 students that got NCEA level 2. They go into teaching to make their students love their learning and to educate them, right? Teachers' mental health will go up. They're better able to teach their students. And what we get on our side of the house is an upskilling of those who need it most in our country.
I thank the speaker once again for his great speech, and now invite up the second speaker of side opposition to continue their team's case today.
AFF wants to make education more relevant by reducing options. They want every school to spend time developing their own curriculum, but have the same access to resources, and want to motivate disadvantaged students by telling them that they will not be able to succeed to the same capacity as their counterparts at higher decile schools, right? 3 questions for you in this debate. Firstly, who gets a better curriculum for their students? Secondly, who gets better like equality across these groups? And thirdly, who gets like better like outcomes for teachers? That's where my split will be. So firstly, on that first question, who gets a better curriculum, right? We've heard a couple of things from the affirming team. Firstly, they say they identify like a few ways in which they will be able, like NCEA could be improved by like making like more interesting, etc. Note we actually like didn't hear like why they think this will be more able to do this on their side of the house. We tell you actually we think that government has the same incentive to like make education good for all students across the country and be able to do this. We did like the few things that we think were specifically decided. They said no, thank you. They said that they'll be able to like make things more relevant to like specific students, right? We think one of the greatest like aspects of a national curriculum is that government has the resources, and that like thing has the resources to create standards that can apply to literally every student, right? When a school has significantly more limited resources and can't provide all those options, it means that students who want to study like more niche things or like have things more relevant to them will not like be afforded that option, especially if they go to schools which like have less funding for that, right? Secondly, we heard that it would be like more targeted, like to like general like socioeconomic. I'll get into that later. And then thirdly, we have this assertion that it's like bureaucrats like in charge. Generally, again, we tell you that the government wants good educational outcomes, so they're going to like hire the people that will get the best educational outcomes. Uniquely on our side, it means that every single student will be under a curriculum with the best people developing best people who are developing these curriculums, as opposed to rich schools like Scots College being able to buy up all the good people to like develop those things, and not like no thank you leaving that leaving like other like lower decile schools who do not have those resources to like not have the same like quality of people developing their curriculums. That's an immense harm that they have to accept on their side, right? Secondly, they also told us that NCEA makes more assumptions in schools, right? Again, like a bit of a characterization point, because we actually think NCEA is a very broad system that inherently provides an opportunity for every single student across every single school, right? And it allows students to go and set standards, no thank you, even outside of subjects that are offered at their school, which we think is actually really, really important and not an option available when schools generate their curriculums and these tests don't exist for other things, right? So generally, we think we're able to create better curriculums because we get more like the most qualified people developing the curriculum for all, and we get a broader set of things for people to do, as opposed to being targeted by a lack of resources in school. I'll take a POI.
Yeah, so schools are already constrained by staff in terms of teachers and what they can teach. How do you get more subjects on your side?
Notably, two things. Firstly, exactly what I just said. Students are able to take, in one world, in your world, you have the teachers teaching to a subjects, and then no opportunity for the student to go further than that if they want to go to a different thing. Secondly, we also think that you take resources away from funding these schools by and these schools having to spend more money developing their curriculums instead of spending that money on teaching their students. That's a harm right there. Okay, moving on to who gets better equality, right? We told you quite clearly, right, that there will be a strong bias by these schools to do meet certain things, right? We think what this looks like is even the most well-intentioned school that is in lower decile is going to see that most of their students will not be able to achieve university entrance, and so we're not going to provide that or focus on that opportunity at all at the school. We think that is immensely harmful because it means the students who would be able to achieve and do well in that system and go to university now literally do not have that option because the school is completely focused on only achieving the things the best things. So that's in the best world they are targeting students in a way that inherently excludes others, right? Secondly, we also tell you that we are able to moderate, which means that actually we're going to be making sure that all tests are being marked equally across the board, and schools aren't going to be able to insert subconscious bias. They tell you that there will be government regulations. Uniquely on our side, the government is more able to regulate it because everyone is setting the same standards, and so they know what they're trying to mark. When the school sets their own curriculum, they are always able to set it differently. And be able to get away with it. Yeah, and finally they talked to us about specifically Māori students and those who will not be able to who we need to be targeted more to. Notably, we have a large shortage of te reo Māori teachers within the country, right? Because of a history of oppressing language, which means that we don't have those experts. When you now to run a te reo Māori course, you need to be able to afford to buy at these very, very limited amount of specialists to develop your curriculum. Some schools, low decile schools, who will have a greater percentage of Māori students, will not be able to develop that curriculum because they will not be able to afford those people, those teachers. This means that they're actively removing the ability for Māori students to be able to take te reo Māori, and we think that's actually a unique harm on their side. Very, very bad. And finally, who gets better outcomes for teachers, right? They tell you that all of most of the material was hinged on the fact like they get a better education. So like in it being that they'll be able to provide a better education to their students, and thus will be happier, right? We actually think so but we think that doesn't stand for everything I've previously told you. Notably, they also remove the ability for teachers to be able to like switch schools, right? Because they will like if they are learning to teach to the specific curriculum that exists at one school, they will not be able to as easily move to another school and teach another curriculum and to learn, because they'll have to like learn another curriculum. That's like a barrier that gets in the way there. Also, you're now putting the burden of creating these curriculums on these teachers. We think that's also very harmful, because we think that generally because you inherently like doing the work significantly more, right? Because on our side of the house, we only have to develop one curriculum. On their side of the house, they develop hundreds throughout the country. That means there's hundreds of more hours going from teachers, not into teaching students, which we think gets better outcomes, or even helping their students be more engaged, which is what they claim to do, but instead is spent on developing these curriculums that are just unnecessary. We think that actually this creates a very large amount of stress, because we tell you teachers do care about teaching and improving the lives of students. We agree with them, but now you're telling those teachers to spend hours and hours developing these curriculums as opposed to like actually being in the classroom, which is why we think most teachers enter the profession, which is something that we don't support. We also just like provides an extra like level of workload, and also we're taking funding away from teachers because we're spending like money on developing all these curriculums. So that's not something we support either. So what have we told you today? We've told you, A, we get better curriculums because we are like more able to use experts and like use like better teachers to develop these curriculums. We get better equality because students are like at like different schools will be able to like have a wider range of options and not limited by their school. And finally, we get better outcomes for teachers. And for those three reasons, very proud to negate.
I thank the speaker very much for their speech, and now invite the third speaker of Side Proposition to close off the substantive portion of their team's case today.
What both Team F and Team NIC have said throughout this entire debate is that we stand for equality. Now, what equality do we stand for? We stand for the equality of these disenfranchised groups who have had generational degradation of their education. We stand for the Māori, Pacifica students, for those students who haven't been able to get their quality education in the past, and to now be able to go into a curriculum that values their culture, that values their beliefs, and actually offers things that will incentivize them to do well and to actually show up to class. What equality does Team NIG stand for? They stand for the equality of students who are already doing well in our current system, who continue to do well in these new systems, because now their curriculum is going to be too easy for them, and now they're going to have a less chance of getting scholarships. You know who has a really bad chance of getting scholarships? Students who have to drop out of school because they just don't understand anything, because their teachers can't help them, because their teachers have to focus on trying to get who they can up to the curriculum. What the teachers have to focus on is trying to get these kids to the standards of this national curriculum that isn't made for these minority groups. That isn't made for these vulnerable groups. It's made for those who are already doing well. It's made for those who have had the privilege of having an education their entire lives, and for their parents to have an education their entire lives. Now, in this debate, I've identified two main points of clash. First of all, how does this affect the students, which is the major thing in this debate, because we stand for those disenfranchised and unprivileged students. And second of all, is the effect on the teachers. So firstly, under the students, what did we hear from Team F? We heard that two different groups support these students. First of all, the government. They said that government offers lots of subjects, there's accessibility, there's moderation, and they have teacher advisors. Firstly, the government cares about the numbers. The government cares how many people are passing NCEA, all right? They have numbers of we want this many people passing, which means that they will change to make sure that people are failing. They will change their curriculum to make sure enough people are getting not achieved on their externals. They will mark to a bell curve that makes sure that 40% of students, regardless of whether or not they have the knowledge of the subject, means that they fail. We do not stand for this. We stand for teachers being able to make curriculums that actually teach students and reward them for doing well, all right? Second of all, this government has they don't go around to schools and actually see the difficulties that these students are facing. They don't see the individual harms that these students are facing. They just see the numbers. That is why the teachers are in a better position to create this curriculum than the government, all right? Third of all, they said that NCEA offers more accessibility. This is inherently false, all right? This accessibility is only an offer in richer schools where they can afford all the teachers to offer all these subjects that they're saying. Okay. These lower decile schools do not have the teachers already to teach these subjects. So their point about accessibility and all these different subjects is irrelevant, because they still can't get access to them under NCEA. Now we're making sure that these teachers can actually teach the subjects that they can teach, all right? Fifth, we've got teachers' advisors, right? These teacher advisors do not have enough power in government, all right? The government, the Ministry of Education, is made by politicians. It is not teachers. It is not teacher advisors actually creating the curriculum. It is politicians who are trying to say what's the best way we can get our numbers up to look good, all right? And sixth, they had a whole point about moderation, except they were forgetting the fact that teachers can pick which pieces they send away for moderation, which means that if they're not going to send away the piece that says that they deliberately marked down for racist reasons, it means that they're going to send away the piece that they're like, this kid got an excellence, and I'm sure about that, so I'm going to send away that one. All right, what else did Team F tell you about students? They said that the school has an incentive to help these students, and we agree with this. The school has the best incentive to help these students. They said that the incentives that the schools have is attendance, pass rates, and to do well. We agree with this, and that is why on our side, this is what we get. We have proven to you that students are more likely to show up to school. So regardless, in our worst case, right, even if they're not learning anything more, at least they're showing up more because it's not completely unbearable, because they don't have massive assignments that they haven't even started on because of this integrated learning approach. We also have students who are actually interested in what they're learning in. The teachers can ask for input. Hey, what is something that you'd like to learn in these subjects this year? And they can move the curriculum around that, which means that the curriculum can always be changing for these schools. It can always be developing as the student body develops. With the NCEA, we're trying to develop it, but obviously these politicians can't actually see what the students are doing. They just give the students a test and like, oh crap, bunch of them failed. We have to do something fast. But they don't know what to do because they're not teachers. They're not trained. All right? Second of all, we proved to you why students are more likely to do well. We proved to you that students are more likely to be able to do well because they are interested in what they're learning. They actually have the opportunity to succeed, and the teachers want to give them this opportunity to succeed, but we can't. Team F throughout this entire time has been saying that we might not get our benefits, so it's better to just not try. But the thing is, it is important that we try, because we told you that NCEA is rooted in colonialism, it's rooted in offering better education for people who already have it, and it's rooted in making sure that these disenfranchised groups do worse, because they don't have the equal access to education. So, into a little bit underneath, who becomes disenfranchised? Under NCEA, we have actual disenfranchised people. We have groups who cannot get the access to the education because they drop out, because they see the Māori pass rates are so much lower than normal, but then they just think, why try if I'm not going to be able to do it? If we lower the standard a little bit, then we're more likely to have them to reach that standard, to actually try, rather than just give up and fail, all right? They also tried to say that now students won't be able to get scholarships because they attend low decile schools, and ignoring the fact that scholarships are not just based on academics. It's based on you being a well-rounded student, something that our approach also helps with. We help more integration between subjects. We help integration between whatever extracurriculars and other things as well, all right? Now, finally onto my second point of clash about teachers, which ultimately isn't too important, but because they brought it up so much, I'm going to respond to it. But I'd like to remind you again that these students that we're trying to help are the most vulnerable. They are the disenfranchised, and they are the people who we need to help most, all right? So, how do teachers come into play? AFF tried to tell you that these teachers are striking because they don't have enough money and that we're removing teachers from swapping schools and a bunch of underdeveloped analysis, all right? We'd like to point out that NCEA is always changing. So regardless of whether or not they're going to swap schools, they still have to relearn all the changes that NCEA is making, and we don't see any difference in this on our side. Second of all, curriculums always change between schools, okay? Not every school offers the exact same one. It offers the same assessments and the same marking schedule and everything, but it might, in one history internal might be on Gallipoli and one might be on the Vietnam War, which means they still need to go and learn how that school is doing it. Now, instead, they're learning how to actually make a difference in their students' lives. They're actually making a difference, which is what teachers want to do. It's why they're going to teaching. They're not getting paid that much. They're striking because they're burnt out and not paid enough for not being able to help these students. We need to be helping both our students and our teachers to ensure a better education system for all. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for their speech and now invite up the last member of side opposition to close off the substantive portion of today's debate.
We do not think Chris Hipkins is sitting in the NZQA office developing Te Ao Haka standards, and this is where the affirming team failed to paint how NZQA runs. We have seen three main points of clash in today's debates. Firstly, what side generally improves educational quality? Secondly, what side improves education for the most disenfranchised students? And thirdly, what side gets better utilised teachers? The pathway we have on Side Neg to win this debate is by showing you that good education is sacrificed by attempting to cater to each individual school. And even if we show it's sacrificed even a little bit, we show worse educational outcomes for students, which will harm their future significantly. So let me start with the first point of clash. What side generally improves educational quality? And we think this improved educational quality looks like better preparing them for the future. Most of the time that will be in like tertiary sectors, but sometimes this will be in like trades. So we had the argument from side F that this would allow more catering, and we had three pieces of analysis. Firstly, for like Te Reo immersion schools, more Te Reo-based education. Secondly, like interdisciplinary science mixed with history. And thirdly, just more engagement to reduce truancy. Firstly, with Te Reo, we think integration is done quite well in the status quo. Sure, there are improvements to be made, but the existence of immersion schools, the existence of Te Ao Haka standards show how NZQA is actually quite multicultural in the way it works. And we see this generally across the world with like Indigenous standards. On this interdisciplinary point, we think there is enough flexibility in NCEA for teachers to decide the topics they're teaching and link it to other subjects. You might, as a history teacher, set something about a war at Parihaka, and you might be able to link this with statistics analysis you get from other sources. So we don't think like skills that are just used in one subject. We think there is actually like interdisciplinary use. And thirdly, what the AFF team have hammered on about is like how they get more engagement. And this is going to reduce truancy. Now, what we tell you is naturally for students, sitting in a classroom is boring. There is no way to sugarcoat around that. For the students who are truanting right now, they do not want to be in a classroom full stop. So what we think, if what it actually looks like when you're getting more engagement is trying to make those lessons like less classroom lecturing and like less information being given. And what we think this looks like is like teachers doing just cahoots or lesson. And if we allow this to happen, we are just generally sacrificing education. To the extent to which we try to engage it more is the extent to which we sacrifice education to try and make it more engaging. Yeah, we just generally think if you're trying to make it more engaging, there will always be a sacrifice of rigor that occurs because That is what scares students away from education. That high rigour, high academic environment is what is scaring students at the moment. Now, we had a bit of analysis around, well, it allows schools to teach more engaging topics. Look, we tell you NCEA is flexible enough for teachers to choose what topics they test about. Sure, the skills are set across curriculums, but what we think is like you can choose how to apply a history standard to a different context. You may be able to choose to apply it about your local community, make a Wellington history internal about the growth of the Pepatera Pa. The history teachers can do this in the status quo, and this is across so many different subjects. We tell you around options. Look, we did hear some better, some good responses from Side F, I will admit that. But what we think is we have better chance of options on our sides. Because if students know the options is available, they are more likely to lobby their skills, more likely to say, hey, NZQA has this, I want to teach this. Around competition, they said on Side F, look, there'll be less competition, meaning it's a less stressful environment. We think competition occurs when you compare against your classmates. I'm not comparing against a student from a different school. And we still think no matter what academic system you have, you're still being graded with your classmates getting your grades at the same time. In fact, we think it gets worse because if you get a 2 out of 8, you know you might be the only one in the class who gets it. But say you get a not achieved or achieved, you know there are thousands or hundreds other students getting it and you're not in your own boat. We also had this analysis about the bell curve. Look, bell curves are generally guides that are followed. They're not rigorous. You give about X amounts of excellences, Y amounts of merits, and this is globally. We see this in IB and NCEA not sticking with these bell curves. They're just general guides, and also they're very changeable. Like if a school sees 1 year more people are getting excellences or more people are doing the work, they can adjust the bell curves. We show that we're better educational quality out of this. For any sacrifice where you're doing catering, where you're getting away from standardization, you ultimately push us up the hands to people who maybe want more students to come to class and make their content less educational. Now, no thank you. On the most important point of clash, what side impacts education for most disenfranchised students? We told you right from NEG that higher decile schools have better resources, connections, and money. This is what allows them to get better results in the current day, but also because again, more well-off students who aren't suffering the same oppression they get from the home system. We tell you if we give lower decile schools control over their education, it firstly means they get a more need to pass, and we've had this acknowledged that they can actually lower the difficulty for schools. But fundamentally, we have 3 responses. Firstly, if they're lowering difficulty just so they can get more students involved, what happens when they go to university? Universities aren't going to adjust their curriculum because one college does it. Secondly, we secondly think generally you get a worse education when you lower standards. Even if the intent is to get more people involved, you are still getting lower quality education. And this is also felt by disenfranchised students. We had a lot of analysis about catering of white bureaucrats, but listen, we tell you teachers, and through incentive analysis, that teachers are heavily involved in the system because the government needs them to develop efficient standards, but also you can't have white people developing to Al Haka standards. They know this will not create effective standards. All we've heard from Side F in this debate is an assertion that this doesn't happen with no mechanisms to support this. We think our general government incentives are strong enough to overcome this, and highlighting there are some places where a white person cannot adjust the curriculum appropriately. No, thank you. We also told you about bias and moderation and how this could be really harmful at split for Māori students who are getting discriminated against. And the only response we had is, well, they can choose the papers. This is just not true on a global scale. Ultimately, if they could choose the papers that they get moderated, governments know this will mean they select the... yes, I'll accept that.
Yeah, so you just said NZQA caters very well to Indigenous students. Why then are Indigenous students failing NCEA at a disproportionate rate?
Because of other causes. Certainly, Māori students are not worse off because they're worse off in the classroom. It's because they have worse off finances and home life. It's because they have such a wide range of other inequitable causes that are not education that mean when they get to the classroom, they are worse off. We just think on a world scale, if governments let teachers pick the standards, they would get moderated. We would see this doesn't work and governments would know this, so they do it more randomly, and we see this in the status quo. Look, we think this point of clash is the most important because it's what's been most discussed, but is also about the most vulnerable people in our community. Thirdly, what side gets better teachers? We've told you two problems, overwork and pay. To pay, we told you the money spent on developing curriculums can be given to teachers instead so they can live better lives and generally get better livelihoods. But we also told you you'll get more overwork if you're tasked to create more tests. That is simple. That is like something you can't rebut. If you're doing more tests, that is more work. That is why we show that we get better teachers and why we win today's debate.
I thank the speaker for a fine speech. And now, as is customary, for leaders' replies, we reverse the speaking order and cut speaking times in half. So I invite up the leader's reply speaker for side negating to close off their team's case today.
Fair, preparatory, accessible. These are things that we get with standardized schooling systems that we don't get under Side F. We think, on Side Neg, that the debate has ultimately come down to the education outcomes of students, and regardless of the teacher's point, we think that actually the well-being of teachers and the prowess of teachers actually directly goes into like how well students do, how well students are feeling. So we think that that all comes under education outcomes. But I'll break it down. So firstly, catered curriculums and students. How does a student react to a catered curriculum? Are catered curriculums actually going to attain the outcomes that the negating team wants? And like, how are schools going to make these? So, we told you from first that catered curriculums make for less prepared, worse off students. We told you that they sacrifice education for pass rates because schools offer curriculums that will like cater to their students, maybe. Maybe we believe that these schools will have good incentives in mind, but actually we see that schools are tired, teachers are tired, and they just want pass rates up, attendance rates up. They want the certificate rates up. So, this doesn't look like more engaging classes. This doesn't look like better standards. It instead looks like different schools having vastly different difficulties and vastly different future opportunities. And we told you this throughout the line. We heard this unrebutted. We heard disengaged, we heard bored, but we didn't hear why one of these disengaged or bored students would, even if we believed that they would be like more engaged, then have the same opportunities in future life for tertiary education or for trades from a school with the funds to give them like the best possible curriculum. We didn't hear why, if you were a university and you were picking between a school with a well-funded, well-made curriculum that had resources for a good education for all of their students versus one that had an easier, less rigorous curriculum that was like less well-funded, so therefore worse quality. We didn't hear why a university would take those at the same value. We told you again and again, and we heard this unrebutted. We heard a lot about truancy. We heard that students are not coming to school because they're disengaged. And then we heard that under their side of the house, they would make more engaging curriculums because teachers would be able to cater. We heard that they'd be able to teach about the history of like what's going on at the moment. They'd be able to teach rural things in rural areas, quote unquote. We think that actually for a school that like, for a rural school, a low decile school, like we've both been talking about, they're not going to have the resources or the funding to pay the teachers to have these really engaging classes with these really high quality. And we brought you that at James. We think that actually the schools that need it most can't afford to like pay for all of their own resources to create all of their own engaging curriculums. And under our side of the house, we uniquely have government, like have this outside body, NZQA, being able to give the same opportunities to each school. And like, we heard a little bit back about this, like, oh, schools have to have a certain number of subjects anyway. But we think that regardless, schools, again, are just catering the difficulty level so that students will get their pass rates up, which actually does only end up having an effect on these students for like 1 or 2 days when they're like, yay, like I passed my school's accreditation criteria, but then they don't get into tertiary education because there's a now there's a bias in the system. We think that like the people that matter most, we agree, are like disenfranchised students. We don't think that this model accurately like fixes the problems that are at the root. We told you at Zandi, actually, and at first, that, like, these students had bad home lives. These students had bad finances. That's a problem, like, with systemic racism. That is not a problem with NZQA. NZQA actually, like, very well does bicultural teaching, but what we do think is that all of this money that's going into, like, the upheaval of the education system can actually, like, maybe go into paying Te Reo teachers more. Maybe can go into, like, better courses. But what happens under their side is that only goes to schools who are rich enough to afford curriculum experts and people who can design these engaging curriculums. What their side what they failed to address is that all of this takes a level of equity that we don't currently have, so that schools who are already disenfranchised will continue to be disenfranchised, and there is absolutely no point. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for a great speech, and now invite up the leader of Side Proposition to close off today's debate.
I'm improving, guys. I just have to button. Affirmative Team's path to victory in this debate was to prove that NZQA or any other standardized testing system is the best system to cater for the students who our country and countries around the world is failing. They lost this debate by building the majority of their case around rich students who are already successful and will continue to succeed regardless of the system that they're in. 2 points of clash in this speech. First of all, how students are benefited, and second of all, how teachers are benefited. Firstly, on students. Note that this is like the most important issue in the debate. These are the people we care about the most. What do they say here? They say more subjects, more resources under an NZQA system, right? Firstly, we point out like that these schools still get the same funding, the same rate of funding. The funding doesn't change on each side of the house. Like, it's just the system, the curriculum that they're teaching. So they have the same chance to offer these subjects that they do in the status quo. Even if they can't offer these subjects, right? Most schools can't offer these subjects anyway. They don't have enough teachers to get these subjects. So the only change here might be, like, in their best case scenario, is to these rich schools who have enough money anyway in the bank to cater for that. Secondly, we told you that subject quantity isn't actually that relevant. Quantity, like, is confusing to people. There's, like, people can't choose from all these options, right? Like, and only some of those large, like, 2,000 subjects that they offer, and that's an exaggeration, but only some of those subjects are actually beneficial and are actually credible to employers and to universities. Students don't know that. Like, being offered a lot of subjects isn't just a benefit to them. What else do they say here? They say that the accreditations that are, like, standardized are able to get students into tertiary education. Firstly, we say here that NCEA is so standardized that it doesn't actually guarantee anything, because, like, just with a label of passing level 2, that's, like, so generic. So many people have that. It doesn't actually really guarantee anything there. It's not, like, needed, and it's not specialized, right? But even if that NCEA label is useful, like, firstly, the most important students in this debate, the students that we care about most in this debate, aren't the ones who are likely to be going to university, right? What we need to be doing is to upskill them to a workplace level first, and then maybe later down the line, we can upskill them to the point where they can be going to university. Like, we can't just be making this massive jump, this massive gap that, like, that Neg has been trying to, like, say that we don't have to prove that we're getting them up to a tertiary level. We only have to prove some improvement to these students, right? But even if, like, the other thing is that we engage them, we give them motivations to come to school because we're making the learning relevant to them. We're making them do extracurriculars. Also note here we had a point about how it's less stressful for students, this is good for their mental health. This was completely unresponded to by Neg. They also say that different disenfranchised students are benefited because, like, on our side of the house, low-income students aren't given the same opportunities as rich private schools, right? But firstly, they don't need those opportunities. Like, we need to set realistic expectations. This is what we said at first. Because the students come into secondary school at a lower level anyway, they need to improve, not jump straight into high achieving, right? Like, they can't make that jump because they're coming in at a lower level. They just need to get better. That's what we care about. We told you that they're going to be able to get easier vocational pathways because we can build in specialist systems into these schools. We told you that there's flexibility to cater the system to local areas, certain minority groups, this kind of things that we don't have under a standardized system. Ultimately, this is where the meat of the debate lies, in these, like, these students that the system is failing, and we think that our side of the house is the only side of the house today that has provided any sort of concrete benefits towards these students. Second point of clash, how teachers are benefited, right? They say here, too much workload on these teachers to make this curriculum, right? What do we say? We say that they're already spending so much time trying to learn all the NCEA stuff, especially as the curriculum changes all the time. They're going to these conferences, they're learning about subjects that they don't even teach. Like, even if it is a workload on these teachers, we told you that teachers are already unhappy teaching to the test. That they will put the work in because they want to teach better, because ultimately their incentives are to benefit the students, right? And so they're likely to put that work in, they're incentivized to put that work in because they want to benefit the students, but also because then the system that they're teaching will be easier for them to teach themselves. So we benefit teachers, we benefit students, and ultimately we upskill those in this country who we are failing.
I think all the debaters thought was a really fine debate today. I encourage the debaters to cross the floor and shake hands, and then could everyone just pop outside for a moment to give the judges a moment to